In today's episode, we're discussing how to make sure your end users and technical teams are prepared for the transition to Mac at scale. There are a lot of things to consider that impact on the end user experience, so today we're joined by Kristin Hubler, a training and adoption expert who will walk us through how to manage the change we're about to unleash on the organization. Thanks for joining us, Kristin, and welcome to We Got Your Mac.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the reasons that Kevin and I are really keen to have you on, Kristin, is because when we've been talking to a lot of people now about Mac adoption, we've recently found that some of our colleagues and maybe friends as well who've opted to start using Mac, particularly at work, have actually found adapting to them has taken maybe a little longer than either of us expected.
It's funny. I like to compare it to like getting in a rental car. You get from the airport, you know how to drive. You've been in a car before, so it's nothing new. And yet it can feel like a spaceship sometimes where, you don't know where everything is. And you might take a few minutes and you can figure it out. But at the end of the day, are you actually using all the features of that car? Do you know where the heated seats are? Do you know how to use cruise control? Most of the time people don't. And so when we switch to devices, it can be very easy to oversimplify and just think, all right, yeah, I did it here, I can do it over there. But there's always a learning curve, even when it's easy to use and even when you love it. I mean, for me personally, I am Apple all the way in my personal life. I've got a Mac, I've got iPhone. Do not invite me to a chat where the bubbles are green, all right? Like I'm diehard Apple. And yet in my work life, I use a PC right now. All of my tricks that I use, all of my shortcuts, all of my processes are not around in Apple Computer. And so it would be, even for me who loves it, would want it, does it in my personal life, there would still be a learning curve. It would still be hard.
So what's different today than change and process management of yesteryear? Like what's so different today?
Yeah, so this is interesting. A lot of people that have rolled out technology deployments, they think, all right, I used to do it this way 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and this is how it worked. This is the budget we used. This is, how we rolled out PCs in the past. So rolling out Mac shouldn't be that different. But really, the world has changed. Think about your life pre-pandemic, right? January 2020. Were you in the office every day? Were you working remotely? For a lot of us, all of that changed. And so now our day-to-day work is different because we're more hybrid, we're more remote. So there's more technology involved than ever before. And then also, the digital transformation, the fact that we're using more technology makes it harder to learn and adapt. Imagine if you showed up to work in the 20th story, of a building. And so you get there and you see all these people walking towards an elevator. Like, all right, best way up to the 20th floor. I'm going to go and I'm going to follow them and I'm going to go on that elevator. Right now, it's like you get to the building on your computer and you don't know an elevator exists. So you're taking the stairs every single day. And it's just because you haven't had the training, no one showed you. And this isn't like a back to the office pitch or anything like that. It has nothing to do with that. Because whether you're in the office, you're at home, the majority of your day is still happening on that computer. And so as we deploy technologies like this, we need to think about how much is happening digitally, and that's going to require more training, more constant training, because another big difference is how the technology deploys now happens much faster. Do you remember, like Kevin, Victoria, do you remember the days of, rolling out where you would actually go and you would purchase the software, put it on your computer, and it would be good for 3 years?
Yes, I'm old.
Yeah, I also remember the days of upgrading things by going and shoving a disk into each individual device.
Yep. So when you have upgrades like that, it's a lot easier to say, oh, we're going to do one big Excite day. We're going to do one big push. Everyone's getting Mac right now, and we're going to roll it out, and we're going to do all this training around it, and then everything's just going to be on autopilot for the next few years. It doesn't happen that way. Updates happen constantly, things change. I mean, it's like getting in your car and all of a sudden you've got the shift moved to the other side or something like that. Victoria, you talked about the windows being on opposite sides. It feels small, but if you're not expecting that, it can be very jarring.
And I guess there's an assumption as well that because a lot of the tools that people or the applications that people are using are effectively the same ones, they've got the same names, there's going to be an assumption that actually people don't need to know that because they're using the same browser, they're using the same meeting solution, they're using the same productivity suite, but they're not quite the same, are they?
They're not only are they not the same, but I can guarantee you, even if they are the same, people aren't using them as productively as they could be. Because for most organizations, it's a common story I see all the time. The pandemic pushed everybody to the technology, to the remote work, and everyone did an amazing job. We survived. IT teams rolled things out as quickly as they could, provided the support they could. But to this day, I can't tell you how many times I get on a meeting with someone, whether it be WebEx, Zoom, Teams, and people don't know about those simple features that make life not only more like productive and efficient, but just better, easier. It makes you enjoy your work more. And so not only do we need to be aware, as you said, Victoria, of those differences between a PC versus Mac, which I'll get to in a second because there are some, but also knowing that people still need more training. They need more awareness around what is in the tools, even if they've been using them for years, because there's likely a lot more that they're not aware of.
Before you get there, Kristin, you're talking a
Yeah.
lot about the end user. Tell me about the change of the IT department. Like, how does the department initiating the change deal with the change?
I love talking about because it's built in right into the name, right? You're giving people a new operating system. You're giving them a new way of operating. And so it's naturally, you have to realize that it's going to operate differently than the system that they had before. And the admin team has to be prepared for that. And so a lot of the time, if you have an organization that's been primarily PC focused, the entire team knows how to do that. They know how to do updates. They know all the security around that. And so now they need that same education around Macs, around Apple. And I'd say, Kevin, there's two sides to that. One side is going to be, all right, they need to know kind of how to set it up, how to keep the security up, how to get it running from an admin perspective. But then they also need to be aware of the questions end users are going to ask, the challenges that they're going to face. And this is where change management comes into play. Because if you are forcing this change, if you're saying, all right, we were a PC organization, now we're a Mac organization, then you need to get ahead of that, be aware, ask people, hey, how are you working right now? How are you using your PC? And making sure that you can communicate those differences to them. If this is a volunteer thing, people raising their hand, hey, can I have a Mac? Then it's also good to make sure that you've got some sort of one-pager documentation that gives them that heads up that, hey, the Microsoft tools that you are using on your PC, they're going to look different on your Mac. The difference may not matter for what you do in your job, or it may matter a ton. So just making sure that people are aware of those differences. So when you talk about educating your admin team, your help desk, your support team, they have to know how to run it. And they also have to know what's going to trip up those end users.
It's not even just the admins and the people who are doing the support. Actually, it's going to impact on the people who are designing your technology solutions, the people who are building them, the people who are procuring them. They all need to know. So even if you put out an RFP for a new project, that's got to include the fact that this needs to work with Mac as well as with Windows.
Yeah, especially when you have really large organizations, a lot of people may not even be aware that a lot of people have Mac. And so they could go really far into this like project where they're like, all right, this is going to be great. We're going to set this up. It's going to work, a certain way. And then all of a sudden, halfway through, they realize, hey, there's actually 10,000 people on Apple, and we need to figure out, what those differences are. So that's something that's important to, communicate out if you decide, hey, we're going to offer this, making sure that people are aware and you can kind of figure out, hey, what are those things that we need to communicate? Because it will look different for every organization. And that's going to be in any type of change management. When you deploy technology, you need to do a certain amount of discovery. You need to ask your end users, how are you working? Ask those people that are developing those tools, making those decisions, what are your plans 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road, and make sure that you're able to kind of plan around that and incorporate that into what you're doing.
Are there generational differences here, Kristen? Like, are there differences in younger employees versus older? I mean, what's your view there?
Yeah, so there definitely are. We're finding that younger generations are more used to Apple for the most part, generally speaking, are more used to Apple products. They all have iPhones, but as I said at the beginning, I've got my iPhone, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to need training if I start using stuff at work because those workflows are just different. But then also Google is a big one that those, Gen Z, younger generations, they grew up on Google, on share. I mean, I'm sure you guys, I still remember the first time I saw live co-authoring in a document where two people were in this. I mean, this was when I was a teacher. Yeah. So this was after, and I remember watching my students using Google be like, wait, you're all on different computers. How are you in this same document? And it was amazing to watch. But these kids that are coming up into the workforce now, they're used to this. They grew up on this, and so they might be more okay with using products like Google, Apple. But again, that doesn't mean they know how to use it at work. That doesn't mean they know what those implications, are going to be if they decide to make that change. And for the most part, browser applications like Google are going to work the same, whether it's a PC or a Mac, but there are some hiccups that you come across. Anything that's going to involve the desktop, like syncing a Google Drive, that will look slightly differently. So again, it's nothing that's going to like mess you up from using it. It's just you have to think about it, communicate that, and make sure people have training on it. If all of your training that you have around your products is centered around a PC, then those Mac users are going to feel left behind. And I'm a former Microsoft trainer, and I remember sitting in sessions training on Excel and having people put in the chat, well, I'm using a Mac. And I'm just thinking like, oh, okay, this is going to be very different for you, and having to talk through that.
It looks like it's lots of small bits of friction that are potentially added to people's days if you don't think about the detail that they need to know. It's not the big stuff, it's the little stuff that is going to make them feel less productive, feel more stressed, feel that they're not getting an equal experience to their Windows users peers.
That day-to-day experience, like that's what makes or breaks the employee experience. That's what makes people stay at a company and stay for years, is when they feel like they have the support, they have the technology, that it's being addressed. And again, this is something that's different today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when the technology was deployed differently. So that's why we need to rethink about how we're supporting people, because it's those small things that really add up. In change management, we often refer to them as, there might be a transformational change, which is like, all right, the entire organization was on a PC. Now the entire organization is moving to Mac. That is transformational. We need to have a communication plan around that. We need to have training around that. We need to have admin training around that. We need to have maybe a champions program to do some peer-to-peer education. Like, that's a huge change. If you're not deploying to the whole org, if it's just a smaller kind of operating system upgrade, something like that, that's often referred to as incremental or adaptive changes. Those, it's very easy for the IT project team to just kind of say, oh, that's not that big of a deal. Because for them, it's not. They're like, they are in this. Like, they're used to this. They're like the race car driver. They can drive any car. It's not a big deal for them. But for us, it is. And especially when you have a lot of those small adaptive changes back to back to back, it ends up being transformational. So you have to keep that in mind. If you're like, oh, it's just a Mac rollout, it's just to this many people. Well, look at how many justs you have throughout the year, and then look at that big picture, and you may need to consider a larger communication plan, a larger strategy that ties everything together. We haven't talked that much yet about the individual change to an end user. So something that a lot of organizations get wrong is that they think everyone is going to go through a change at the same time. So they look at a rollout, they look at a migration plan or a product deployment plan, and they say, all right, in order to do the technical side of it, we've got all of these steps. We're going to do this phase is going to take 2 months. That's discovery. Then we're going to do the technical movement. We're going to move data over, whatever we're doing, and then we're going to follow up, and then we'll have a little reinforcement, but then, then we're good to go. And they think, okay, individual people, they need change too. Maybe they went to, a change management seminar and they know, all right, I got to do change management. So they think, okay, I'm going to go through those phases with the end users as well. But the thing is, people don't all change at the same time. They don't change at the same pace. And so when you are doing large scale technology changes, you need to ask that question, hey, how big is this change? Is it really transformational? Do we need to put more thought into it? And if it is, what are those different groups in our org? Are they going to change at different paces? I love using the example of telling people that we're going to run a marathon. So let me ask you, Kevin, Victoria, if I told you, all right, next spring, all of SHI is going to be running a marathon together, what goes through your head?
No.
Everyone but me.
What about you, Kevin? Are you a runner at all?
Everyone but me. No, not a runner. No. No, thank you. There's so many other things I'd like to do in my life.
Right. So, and if I let you sit with this question for a little while, you'd probably get more questions, more concerns. Well, am I going to be paid for this? When is this happening? Like, how fast do I have to run?
Who's this magical trainer that's going to get me to run 26 miles? That's who I want to know.
Yeah. And so for a lot of people, especially when it's a change that's kind of being forced upon people, this is the direction we're going, you need to think about everyone's going to have different reactions. And so there are going to be some people, I'm a runner. I've run marathons before. So if someone says we're going to run that, to me, it's like, all right, cool, I'm in. Having that awareness of the change that's coming immediately leads to desire. Now, that's terminology from ProSize ADKAR model for individual change, which is ProSize, a change management program that is very used often in the change management world. And so, you have to, I like keeping that in mind. I like using that as an example because it shows you that everyone's different. They're all using the tools differently. And so as you start to spread that awareness, tell people about change that's coming, and start to think about what training do we need, you have to think about the individuality of all of your employees. Granted, you're not going to meet every single person where they are, right? If you're a huge org, but you can hit those larger groups. You can recognize that, hey, sales uses their tools different than marketing does. Let's make sure when we communicate to them, when we train them, we are considering that in the process.
Kristin, thank you. Tell us about sort of the top 3 tips you would leave customers with when they're looking to go about change management process.
There's so much that you have to remember, but I'd say if I had to pick 3, I'd say first one, don't make assumptions. Don't assume that it's going to be easy for everyone. Don't assume everyone knows like the jargon you're using, the language. If you talk about even an operating system, you'd be surprised how many people don't even understand what you mean with that, or a browser, like simple terms. So making sure that you're not making any assumptions of the capabilities or the workflows when you're deploying technology. If you do have assumptions, make sure you validate them before doing any large changes. And then the second is going to be broaden the scope of training. So we often get so tied to the technology of, okay, we're deploying Mac. This is the latest operating system. I'm going to put out some training on that, and then that's it. But really, again, it's that holistic picture of an employee's work life and the way all the tools integrate together. What software are they using? How is that going to be impacted? And how is it going to be different for each person? So try to get out of the tiny little, okay, we need this training, and then look more into, okay, hey, where are we going 6 months from now? What type of training do we need to get there? And then have that be your guide. And then finally, establish some sort of on-demand support. This might be e-learning, this might be an intranet site, anything that people can go to after that live training, after that push. If you do everything right, you've probably done a communication plan, you've given them documents to reference, something like that. But the next week, they're going to be at that computer and they're going to forget what you told them. They're going to forget everything that was shared. So make sure you have some sort of source of truth they can visit, and then teach people to fish. So we don't want the only way for people to get help to be submitting an IT help desk ticket. Okay, nobody wants that. We want to decrease those. So make sure you establish, whatever it may look like at your org, some way for people to go and help themselves and keep that training going all year long.
Thank you very much for joining us, Kristin. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please do join us for the next episode in a couple of weeks. And for more information and for any episodes you might have missed, please visit us at wegotyourmac.com.